You're listening to Beyond Her Grind, the podcast that gets at the root of what motivates women of color to want more in their careers. I'm your host, Esther Leonard, a career development professional, aspiring entrepreneur, and fellow grinder. Stay updated with weekly episodes by subscribing to this podcast, and be sure to follow me on Instagram at Beyond Her Grind. And check out my website at beyondhergrind.com. Let's get to the root of it. The episode you're listening to is from my previous podcast, Esther the Career Coach. Hello, everyone. Hello, powerful woman. Hello, friends and family and supporters, classmates, whoever you are. Thank you so much for tuning into the second episode of my podcast, Esther the Career Coach. And I am Esther, your host. And again, as always, I am so grateful for you all to be here with me. Continue to please support. If this is your second episode, thank you, a million thank you. If this is your first episode, I am very grateful for you as well. Keep listening, tuning in to my podcast. Continue supporting me just simply by listening. If you want to support me in other ways, now I have a support or a donate feature on my podcast. So if you go to my website, anchor.fm/Esther the Career Coach, you can donate anything from $1 to more. If that's what you want, feel free to do that in order to continually support my effort. So today, this podcast is entitled, Who Are You? When I was thinking about this topic, I started thinking about Lion King. So just so you all know, I was born in the late 80s. I don't mind sharing my age. I'm going to be 32 this year. And I grew up on Disney, just like a lot of millennials have. And of course, Lion King. So as I'm getting ready for this podcast, I'm thinking about Lion King and, that famous quote, Simba, remember who you are, right? And that's such a powerful moment in the movie. And, I was a child watching that. I was psyched up when it came out last year too. Who else went and saw that CGI version? I did. Yes, who are you? That is the very first step in embarking on your career journey. I've seen clients, I've seen students, particularly students who are, they jump in. Some of them already have an idea of what they want to do. Some of them have an idea of what they want to do based on what their parents told them to. But they haven't had a chance to figure out who they are. So in this episode, we're going to talk about that. How do you figure that out for yourself? Because knowing who you are allows you to figure out what you want to do. And as you figure out what you want to do, you will be able to do that with confidence. It allows you to create boundaries for yourself, for others, for employers, for your colleagues, in your personal life. So today we're going to talk about self-reflection, and I'm going to use some career development tools. Luckily for you, I am a career coach and I work in career services and universities. So when I go to those conferences, all those meetings, and I get information and I use a lot of the theory and the practice, I'm sharing that with you. So this will be exciting. And I will include some links in this podcast so that you can access the websites that I mention and do a little bit more research about things. So specifically what I'm going to talk about is your background and then something that's called VIPS. We use this in career development, and VIPS is an acronym for values, interests, personality, and skills. And I think that if you're trying to figure out who you are, you need to know what your values are. What are you interested in? What's your personality like? What are your skills? Right? And usually when we talk about these, we say when all of these things align or they cross paths, that leads to contentment and satisfaction in your career. So let's just start. I want to start off first with your background, because your background actually shapes your VIPs, right? It shapes your values, your interests, your personality as well. And a lot of times people don't think so hard about why they do what they do. I always knew I wanted to be an engineer since 8th grade. Well, why? Well, my dad is an engineer. They want me to be an engineer. Like, wow, your background, your family affected you. Or something else. Oh, my family really thinks that I should be a doctor. You know, I come from an immigrant family. My mom is a doctor. My grandmother was a nurse, right? My dad works in a lab, you know, and so that's their family. I hear it. I literally have heard this across all industries. Oh, my dad was a lawyer, and I like talking about law with my dad. I loved visiting his office, right? And so that shaped you. So, and that's okay. I'm not saying the background, you know, is an issue, right? I'm just saying it influences you, right? And sometimes it shapes who you are. And maybe you want to go into law because your family was in law, and that's part of you, right? Your values, your interests, your skill sets all align, and it makes sense with your background as well. People don't really think about why they're choosing their career. And again, I mentioned in last week's podcast, you know, your priorities, you know, what other factors affect your decision, being in a family, doing something practical, right? Those things kind of affect your decisions as well. But it's so important to think about, who are you? Why am I choosing what I'm choosing? Right? So one of the things that I recommend is to take some time. If you journal, I think that's going to be perfect. If you don't, maybe start journaling. I think it's a great outlet to release your thoughts, and it's quite meditative. But even if you don't, I've done voice journaling. I have a podcast now, but I actually have little mini podcasts, like mini diary podcasts, in some of, like, probably all of my phones, in which I just talk to myself. But great, now I'm talking to you all. And or write it, blog it, talk to people. But I really think it needs to be somewhere where you could see. And start asking yourself questions about your background, or just answering, like, think about your family. You know, were you born in the U.S.? Were you born here? Did you grow up in a large family? Was your family really connected with your neighborhood or the community, and it seemed like your whole block was your family? Where were you? Were you the first child? Were you the middle child? Were you the last child? Were you the only child? Right? There's a lot of research that shows that being in one of those roles affects who you are, right? They say most presidents are either first childs or only childs, right? So there's something about being a first child or an only child that affects your career, right? Impacts your career, something in your upbringing, right? So do a little research on that. I would say, think about who your friends were. What was the culture like? What did your parents or your guardians, your grandparents talk about all the time? You know, what were their expectations of you? Did they have high expectations of you? Did they have low expectations? Are your parents still together? Were they together when you were growing up? Did they divorce? You know, those things impact you. What do your parents do? Like, really think about it. What do your parents do? Maybe even talk to your parents. What was their first job out of, college? Or if they didn't go to college, what was their first part-time job or whatever it may be? Really start reflecting on that. Did you grow up working class? Did you grow up upper class? What was the neighborhood like? Did you grow up in a diverse neighborhood? Did you grow up in a very segregated neighborhood? Did you grow up in a city? Did you grow up in a rural area? What were the issues that were going on during that time, economically, politically? How did that impact you and impact your choices? What was the financial situations of your home, right? Did your home really value money, right? Did they value competition, ambition, right? Again, are you a first generation student, the first in your family to get a bachelor's degree? Or are you not? Was that expected of you, right? Those things matter. How do all of those things put together impact you? Really start assessing and thinking about that. For me, I already told my story, and I can necessarily share all that, but I mentioned how being the oldest of 8 impacted me. I was always put in like this leadership position. I was the voice. Even my siblings would tell me, if my younger siblings, if they were feeling awkward and they're meeting new people and adults are trying to talk to us, they're like, Esther or Emmanuel will talk. Emmanuel is my brother. He's the second oldest. And so we kind of were put into this role of being the spokespersons of our family. And so that may also shape, or not only shape, but like maybe that's why I have a podcast, right? Because I had to talk for my family, right? So those things, of course, influence you. So take some time to answer those questions for yourself, write about it, and reflect so that you can see how that impacts your VIPs, your values, your interests, your personalities, and skills. And I will go into each one of those. Let's dive into these values. So a value is basically what you hold as dear to you. What's important to you, deeply held beliefs, right? And it affects the way you live, and it affects the way you work. And values are important because when the things you do and the way you behave match your values, you are content. So there's no discord going on. When they don't align, something is off with your spirit. So what are your values? I want you all to think about that. What are your values? And I know I started with your background. How have your family members, how has your background shaped your values? Examples of values are family, security, flexibility, tradition, power, prestige, balance, risk, empathy, compassion, love, justice. And this is just a few. And if you want to look at some values, Scott Jeffrey has a list of over 200 values, and it's scottjeffrey.com. And actually, a few years ago, I was trying to look this up. Y'all don't want to see how my space looks right now because I have like a whole bunch of notes, a whole bunch of journals. I told you I journal. I have journals from like, I don't know, from high school. And there was a time where I just found this. I don't even know how I got on this. I probably read some book. And I was like, what are my values? And I started listing what my top values were. And it was on this website, over 200 values. And I started organizing them. And actually in our practice as career coaches, that's what we do. That's an assessment that we do. And a student may come in. I've done this also with clients, and they're unsure of how to make a decision, because what values help you do is they help you decide what's most important to you. And if you know what's important to you, you make a decision based on that. So what we do is something called the values card sort. It doesn't necessarily have to be a card, but we use cards for it. But it could be a list. And so we share a list of values, and basically we tell them to choose their top values. And it's a way they organize it to most important value. The middle category would be like, you do see its importance, but it's not top there. And then the least important to you. And so we have them categorize it. And then we take some time for them to look over those top values. And then we say, okay, now time to narrow it. Let's narrow it to 10. And they're like, oh my gosh, my top 10 values. Oh, wow, this is hard. And so they narrow it to 10. Then we're like 8. Narrow it to 8. Take 2 out. And then narrow it to 5. And this is a great exercise for people, because then they start really understanding why they feel a certain way. I was working at, this one was actually a graduate student, and she came into my office and she worked for the College Advising Corps. And basically it's a 2-year program where they get recent graduates, college graduates, to work in public schools. And so there's one in Boston. Their role is to help high school students get into college. And so her background was like education, and she was actually getting her master's in higher ed. But she was feeling unsure. And so we talked, and usually I talk about different assessments that we use. So part of self-reflection is doing assessments, and I'll talk about each of these assessments as I talk about the acronym of VIPS. And so we did the card sort, the values card sort. And I remember her telling me, like, I don't know, I really love working with the youth at BPS, Boston Public Schools. That's where she was working. I don't know if I want to be in higher ed. I just feel like there's this disconnect. Or I don't think she was only considering higher ed. I think she was also considering K through 12. So she worked at Apple. And she's like, I just love it. You know, I know people are like, oh, I can't believe you, like, you do sales, you do this. And I'm good at it. That's not necessarily my favorite thing, but I love the people. And so I was like, well, let's do a values card sort. So she would do the values, and, you know, social justice came up and all these things. But one of her top values was diversity. Diversity was like probably a number one value. And I think, you know, out of all the people I've done, you know, very few people put diversity as number one, as a top value. And this is also including people of color, right? They'll probably find other things like financial independence or family, work-life balance, those types of things. But so I was like, okay, well, tell me about this. And she's like, wow, diversity is very important. She was Asian American, grew up in California, and she said that she grew up in a neighborhood where it was just super diverse. Her neighbors were from all over the world. Her neighbors were it was like a working class neighborhood. So she was used to people from a certain socioeconomic class. So she said that she had friends who were Black, Latinx, Asian. And she was like, wow. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, I really like working at Apple because the staff is so diverse. And, for some people, right, if their value is sale, like, competition, I got to make my sales or whatever, that might be their reason for being at some type of store, right? Or working up the ladder, right? But for her, diversity was such an important value that she's even unsure of working in education. And I was like, well, let's talk about education. Why do you like education? And then we saw the social justice. There was this element of helping others, helping society there. But she said, like, I don't like being the only one. Like that was like super important for her. And as a person of color, I totally understand that. But for, other people, they might be like, okay, that's just life. You're going to be the only one. But for her, that's a value. That's a deeply held belief. And if her values are not being aligned, she is really going to feel like she's suffering, right? This misalignment because this value isn't being manifested. So I think that's a really great example of that. So I would recommend for you to really own into that. I know for me, I've written values over the past few years, like I was saying, and they've changed throughout the years. And like I'm looking over one of them, I did it, was it 2016? I did it. And I had contentment, gratitude, purpose, creativity, productivity, meditation, financial stability / independence, family, friends, organization, stability, authenticity, balance, rest. So that's a lot. I think that's more than 10. And then I did it again and it changed. The order had changed. So number 1 was gratitude. How do I be grateful? And so your values can be just personal value, right? Financial independence. I would say the very first time I did this exercise, I didn't have financial independence on there. And then family, friends was number 3, balance. So work-life balance, social balance. Black people is number 5. So I value Black people. Enoughness, being enough or being authentic, right? Affirming others. That's part of my top 10. Strategy, collaboration, communication, whether if it's through direct communication, transparent communication, and kindness. So those are my type 10. And then I went on and I talked about intuition, environment. So decor, how does the space look? That's important to me. Empathy and meditation. So clarity. And that was, I think, about 2 years ago. And then I did a vision board earlier this year, in which I just threw out some values. So I didn't really dive in, but gratitude seems like it's common. Joy, peace, enoughness or authenticity, gratitude, balance, creativity. And so, yes, social justice, vulnerability, courage, Empathy is on there. Empowerment. So empowerment is now a huge value of mine. And so that's shaping what I'm doing. So once you figure out your values, right? The next thing would be to think about your interest. Your interests are what you like to do. So think about your passions, maybe even your hobbies. What do you do that you just get immersed in? And this doesn't necessarily have to be part of your career. For some people, all of that aligns. Like I said, in the beginning of this podcast, I was saying that all of these little things together need to align. But your hobbies or knowing what you just like to do, you just enjoy doing, is still very informative for you. I meet people who, like I said, figure out how to do all these things. But then there are people who are like, okay, this is my job. And because I have 3 kids who are dependent on me, how do I ensure that I still meet my interests? Right? That still needs to be there. Some examples of interest would be like DIY projects, do-it-yourself projects, reading, writing, cooking, editing videos, dancing, sports, magazines, art, helping people, volunteering, working with your hands, having philosophical conversations, performing, solving problems, working with your numbers. So, your interest, right? They bring you life. Think of it like that. So take some time to think about what all of your interests are. And if you want to learn about an assessment, a popular assessment that we use is called the Strong Interest Inventory, or the Holland Code. Many of you all may have experienced this or took this assessment in high school. And basically what it does is it has 6 categories. The categories are realistic. So these are the hands-on people, a lot of the construction, athletic workers. They tie it to occupations. They'll have the realistic, the investigative, which are the thinkers, the researchers, the psychologists, the doctors. And then they have the artistic one, which would be the creators, which are basically like, of course, your artists, or people who like art, right? Maybe I should say that instead of saying the occupation. So, like I said, the realistic would be they like doing things with their hands. They like going outside. They like moving their body. Investigative, they like reading. They like researching. They like, of course, investigating. They like theorizing. Artistic, they like creating, whether if it's painting, art, performing, acting. And then they have the social, which are the helpers. They like to help. They like to serve. They like to volunteer. They like to teach. And then there are the enterprising or entrepreneurial side. And they're considered the persuaders. And so they like to speak and persuade and to motivate people. They like to sell. They like to start new ventures. And then there's the conventional. So they're considered the organizers. So they like to organize. They like checklists. They like data and putting things together. They like some forms of analysis. So basically with the Strong Interest Inventory or the Holland Code, they put find your top 3 categories, and then they'll share some popular occupations that's related to that. And a lot of these categories sort of work together. So you might have a position like lawyer, which falls into like artistic and social, and I think also conventional. So there's elements of all those things in there. So I've done this. I love assessments. And my assessments were ASE, which is artistic, social, and enterprising. And so when I did that, a lot of like educating, communicative type positions came up for me. And again, if you take these assessments, it doesn't mean that you have to be whatever they say you should be on there. But I think it's cool. It's still informative for you. And so basically they just ask what you like to do. And then they come up with these categories and occupations. And that one is actually linked with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if you actually want to really dive into that, you can research that occupation that they recommended, and then research the salary, research that job outlook, and really go further. So we like to use that. So the next one out of the VIPs is personality. So your personality is your way of doing things. What is your style? How do you interact with the world? I went into Google and looked up a definition, and it said a personality is a combination of characteristics or qualities that make up an individual's distinctive character. So this is, again, diving into who are you as a person. And so what does that look like, right? What we do, we use assessments, of course, but even if you don't have any assessment tools, you need to start thinking about, as a person, do you need a lot of quiet time? Are you pretty quiet? Are you reserved? Are you people oriented? How do you get recharged, right? That extroversion, introversion. Are you detail oriented, right? You have to know all the facts. You have to know all the details. You notice the details, whether if it's like on paper or just walking down the street. You notice every leaf. You notice every color. Or are you big picture, right? You aren't as detail oriented. You don't see necessarily what's in front of you. You are future oriented, or you more see patterns. Are you very creative versus more down to earth or practical? How do you make decisions? You make decisions very logically, right? Are you very analytical when you're making decisions, or do you make it with a lot of emotions and with your feelings? And then how do you go about your day? How do you schedule your day? Do you need checklists? Do you need to create a timeline? Are you the type of person who just wakes up and like, ooh, what am I going to do today? And you just go with the flow, right? And so those are different aspects of a personality. I'm using aspects from the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI, but there are a lot of other personality assessments out there. This is very popular. We use it in our practice, and there are some versions like 16personalities.com. And basically what it does is it looks at 4 facets of your personality. Like I was saying, are you introverted or extroverted? Are you intuitive? Are you more observant? Or are you a feeling type person, or are you a thinking type person? Are you a judging or a planning type person, or are you a perceiver or more spontaneous type person? And so basically with those 4 assets of how you interact with the world, how do you see the world, how you make decisions, and how you go about your day, they have about 16 personalities from that. And so, for example, with the Myers-Briggs, I am an ENFJ, which stands for extroverted, intuitive, feeling, judging. So as I was saying, so extroverted, I get my energy from the outside world or external stimuli. And then intuitive, I'm a very big picture. I'm actually a very strong intuitive. I'm not about details. My friends, my boyfriend get annoyed sometimes. I could be out in a restaurant and I'm like, where's the straw? And my friend will be like, it's right in front of you. Because my brain is just like going, is like very imaginative. And then I make decisions based on my emotions, very strong feeler. And then judging, I prefer planning. We like to say this is your preference. If you just, what's natural for you? If you're right-handed, what's natural is writing with your right hand. Not to say that you can't write with your left hand, but it's going to feel awkward. So if I'm put in a situation where I have to be very observant, that isn't natural for me, right? There's some form of disconnect because I'm more of an intuitive person. So what you could do is you could see those different personality types, look it up. In our office, we share popular jobs for that type. And then, but on 16 personalities, it's fun. You all probably already taken it, and they'll share like famous people who have that personality type. I know in our office, we share like what percentage, like ENFJs are a rare percentage. I think only 2% of the population are ENFJs. So I'll just describe what an ENFJ personality type is. And it says warm, empathetic, responsive, and responsible, highly attuned to the emotions, needs, and motivations of others, find potential in everyone. That is so true for me. Want to help others fulfill their potential. Hello, this podcast. May act as catalyst for individual and group growth. Loyal, responsive to praise and criticism. Yes, I definitely am. Sociable, facilitate others in a group and provide inspiring leadership. So I actually think that's a great representation of who I am. It's not perfect. Like, for example, I do have a strong introverted side. When you take these assessments, there's usually a scale. And for me, the scale for introversion, extroversion is actually quite borderline. And I have been, quote unquote, an INFJ when I've taken the assessment, which is more the introverted version. Since that's borderline, there's this aspect or part of me that needs a lot of alone and reflection time, right? It takes a lot of alone time to fill my journals with all my values. And so that's maybe the same for you. Same with the judging / perceiving. My preference is to be organized and check lists and plan out my day. But I have this huge perceiving time, and perceivers are not necessarily only going with the flow, but they also take in a lot of information first before they make decisions. It's interesting. The P versus J, and this might be confusing on a podcast, but for an ENFJ, the J is like a planner. They're pretty decisive. Even if they make their decisions with their emotions or if they make decisions with their thoughts, they're pretty decisive. And a perceiver isn't as decisive. So sometimes it takes me a very long time to make a decision because I'm on the scale, I have a strong perceptive side. And, I could actually go on and on with this because I love personality assessments. I give it to everyone. Got to the point that some of my friends are like, I'm not going to take this assessment. Or when I was dating, I would send it to whoever I was dating just to see. I'm like, ooh, I'm an ENFJ. Ooh, he's an ISTJ. Like, what? How are we going to work together? But so I can go on and on with this. But I still think it is helpful. I do meet students. I do meet clients who are like, I don't necessarily agree with this. And that's, looking at your values, I think that's good. If you have a strong sense of who you are, figuring out who your personality or what your personality is like. Like, oh, I love working in labs because I'm by myself. That's part of your personality. You didn't need an assessment for that. But what I do like about these assessments is it allows you to look up careers. You can just go into Google and say ENFJ popular careers and see what shows up. And then I love the fact that 16 personalities show the celebrities. So like Oprah is an ENFJ, Obama is an ENFJ. I don't know how they know this, but I mean, that feels good for me to know. So that's one way to kind of figure out what your personality is like. Another assessment is called the Enneagram. And so I'm not as familiar with that. I need to take that some more. I only done it once. And basically it looks at your personality based on your set core of emotions, fears, and beliefs. And then there are about 9 sort of personality types. Truity.com, TRUITY.com has a lot of these assessments on there. Go ahead, check that out, and let that resource be there just to help you figure out who you are. All right. And so finally, skills. That is the last part of this acronym, VIPS. And basically skills are the things you do well. You may like art, right? That might be an interest of yours, but you can't do it. So it wouldn't be a skill of yours, right? So skills are the strengths, the talents, and these are abilities that can be natural, right? Maybe you were born with these, it's genetic, or through education and training. You gain a skill through education and training. So I feel like what I'm doing right now, this knowledge that I'm sharing, this is now a skill set for me, right? Of career coaching. But I think there's this strength of mine to communicate clearly and articulately in a manner that is very engaging. I think that's a talent or a strength of mine. So the cool thing is that when you have a skill that you are really good at and that you enjoy doing, that is called a motivated skill. And you need to have elements of motivated skills within your job, right? So there are going to be some skills that you have that you don't like using, and that's going to be with any job, right? But the majority of what you're doing at your job should be utilizing and really taking advantage of your skill sets that you enjoy. So a lot of the skills are actually similar to your interests. So you can have skills that are cooking or editing or writing or communicating, researching, analyzing. So a lot of interests, the ones that I mentioned, could be skills as well. There's also a skills card sort that I do. So similarly to the values assessment that I was talking about, there's one we do for skills, and basically similar concept. You or the client would share their skills, right? We'll have a list of skills. Really good at organizing things. And so they will rate themselves of like they're very good at it versus not so good at it. So like I don't have that skill at all. And then on top of that, they'll also rate whether they enjoy using those skills. And so by the end of that assessment, we kind of look at that and see the skills that they enjoy using. So we basically see their motivated skills. And so a lot of times when I'm working with students or clients, I say, well, are you using those skills in your job? Are you using your motivated skills? While you're looking for jobs, when you're looking at job descriptions, are those motivated skills listed in the duties, listed in the responsibilities, right? And again, even like the values aspect, a lot of times in jobs descriptions, you can get a feel of the culture and what they value. And so you can sense that, and they sometimes have the language within that job description. And that gives you insight into whoever wrote it. Is that going to be your boss? Are they going to value the same things you value? And basically, you can look for jobs using these aspects of who you are. Isn't that amazing? That is pretty dope. I just love it. One way that you can really learn about your skills is the Strengths Finder. So I use the Career Coach, and one of the first things she had me do was take the Strengths Finder. It is a paid assessment that you can find online, and it has a list of 34 strengths. But I've done it with her, and I also did it at work. And at work, they shared my top 5 strengths. And right now, my top 5 strengths are empathy, positivity, futuristic, connectedness, and strategic. So those are my top 5 strengths as of 2018. I haven't taken the Strengths Finder since 2018. So you all can do that as well. Like look at that. So another way that you can learn more about your strengths is by looking at your evaluations, right? Your supervisor, your evaluations from work, and really pay attention to what you did well at. And also in that journal, start writing that list for yourself. Wow, I'm really good at this. Wow, this is my strength. Because this is actually good practice for the question that you're always going to get in that interview of what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And I've done a whole bunch of mock interviews, and people get stuck with that question, with both of those questions, but definitely don't get stuck with the strength question. You put it on your resume. So look at your evaluations. Another thing that the Career Coach did with me was she told me to ask my friends and family what they thought were my strengths. And that is so insightful, because what you think is your strength is much different than what someone else thinks. I was just talking to someone the other day, and she was doing this exercise for herself, and she was like, one of her friends told her, was like, you're really funny. And like, she said she likes making jokes, but she never really thought that she was funny, and she never really thought that humor was her top strength or a strength of hers. And so what does that look like? How is that going to play a part with her future endeavors? So that's VIPS for you. I think as you look at VIPS, right, your values, your interests, your personality, your skills, you want to see if there's a common thread. What's in all of there, right? If you value empathy and you're really interested in helping others, and your personality is a filler type personality, right? And then your skill is you're a great advocate. Wow, that's a thread. That's a common theme that's going on, right? How was that maybe impacted? How much of that came from your background, right? Your family background, because we talked about that earlier. How much of that was shaped from your family background? And start looking at that, right? Remember who you are. Because ultimately, when you know who you are able to create a personal brand for yourself. And that's ultimately, the next step in terms of looking for a job is, one, knowing who you are, and then how are you going to create this brand for yourself on your resume, your cover letter, on LinkedIn while you're networking, right? And we'll talk about that aspect of that. And then how do you turn all these stuff, your skills, your experiences, your accomplishments, who you are, into a pitch when you're talking to people. So that could be another episode. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. That's basically what I wanted to talk to you all about. Please take some time to get to know who you are. That's the first step. I'm repeating myself, but I think that's going to be so important in helping you decide what you want to do in your life, or even decide your next steps, right? Knowing your values. Do you want a new job with a higher pay, or do you want to stay where you're at because you value loyalty and you want to move among the ranks and you want to support your company? Things like that, those decisions that you have to make. Knowing who you are is a process. And like I said, it took so many iterations of me figuring out my values. In a few years, my values are going to change. So this is an ongoing process. But I think you need to do it. So next week's episode, part 2 of Who You Are, I'm going to be interviewing an amazing woman of color. And we will be talking about her journey and figuring out who she is and how that has impacted her career choices. So stay tuned for that next episode. And I hope that this episode has made you feel empowered and ready to take that next step towards reaching your career goals. See you all next week. Just a reminder, follow me on Instagram at Beyond Her Grind and check out my website at beyondhergrind.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. I'd love to hear your feedback so that I can continue to produce more amazing content in the future. Thanks so much, and talk to you all next week.